Well, hi, we're back again with our Due to Snow Day Film Festival here for AP US History. This is our segment devoted to Unit 8 Assignment 7, which is talks about the settlement of the West, or the last frontier, uh, so to speak. Um, Remember that America settled the continent in a sort of hopscotch way. We settled up to the Mississippi River and a little bit to the west, and then jumped all the way over to the Pacific coast to California and Oregon, with the Oregon Trail opening up in the 1840s, and with the California Gold Rush in 1848-49. But we bypassed all that land in the middle. We bypassed what's today most of the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains area, and most of what makes up the southwest part of the United States today. So that was actually the last section of the contiguous 48, the continental 48 United States, that was settled densely. And Americans really didn't turn their energies toward doing that until after the Civil War. A lot of the area wasn't even mapped in very well. There was a myth that it was just a large desert area. It was sometimes known as the Great American Desert. There was this sort of folklore story tale that vast parts of what make up the plains and the Rocky Mountain areas today were just one big desert. And of course that turned out not to be true. But certainly if you go west of the meridian of 100 degrees west longitude, you go west of that, and it is a different landscape. There's very few hills. It's flat, hence prairie. There aren't many trees, and they don't get much moisture each year. They average probably less than 15 inches of rainfall a year out there. So it's too dry to do most kinds of farming. The weather is pretty extreme. You get really nasty winters and really hot summers. And most of what's out there was just vast grassland. And the primary animal of consequence out there was the North American bison, or the buffalo. And at the end of the Civil War, there's the estimate there were about 15 million bison out there on the plains. Now, of course, those bison were the center of culture and way of life for the Native Americans, the so-called Plains Indians who lived out there. There were about 250,000 of them out there at the end of the Civil War. So you jump ahead, though, to 1900, and things have changed tremendously, as so much in the United States changed in that 35-year period from 1865 to 1900. There wasn't a frontier dividing line anymore, where you had on one side of the line was settled area, and on the other side of the line was unsettled area. The bison were largely wiped out, and you now had those big tracts of open land are fenced in. There's railroads crisscrossing around, towns popping up, etc. And in that 35-year period, 9 new states come into the Union, which is quite a bit for a 35-year period, excepting the very beginning of the country. The near extermination of the bison and the damage done to the environment by the type of farming and the settlements and the strip mining and things like that were done was serious. And the Native American groups that were out there saw their culture and way of life virtually disappear right in front of their eyes, right before their eyes, in a very short time. We'll get that's more of a topic for Assignment 8, but just kind of introducing it here. Okay, that serves as our introduction here. If we go on, this part of the frontier was essentially settled in 3 waves. The first wave that came through was known as the mining frontier. The first type of settlements to make their way pop up on the map out there were mining areas. That all started with the gold rush to California at the end of the 1840s, but that was just one episode in an ongoing saga of discovery of major lodes and veins of ore of precious metals and what have you. Um, there were gold and silver strikes all over the place in Colorado, Nevada, Idaho, Montana, Arizona, South Dakota, which meant that there was every time news of some new strike made it back east, there would be another flow of prospectors into the area, and the Native Americans would get pushed off yet more land. Pikes Peak in Colorado, very near there in 1859, there was a huge gold strike there, and 100,000 or so miners fled out there in a very short period of time. The biggest one was in Nevada in the mid-1860s, around 1863-64. The so-called Comstock lode was discovered in Nevada, and within 25 years, somewhere around $390 million in 1890 terms, money, had been mined out of that lode just in that 25-year period from about 1864 or so to about 1890. And that's why Nevada came into the Union in 1864, because of the influx of population, because of the strikes at the Comstock lode. Whereas New Mexico and Arizona didn't come into the neighboring states, didn't come into the Union until 1912. The pattern of settlement meant that you could have a stream or a mountain area that was vacant of human habitation largely, and a strike is made by some prospector in the area, and pretty soon there's a town or series of towns that pop up and dot the landscape in the area. But they were hastily put together towns, and just as quickly as they were set up, many times that was how quickly they would disappear. Once the gold or silver or copper or whatever was being mined in the area dried up, once the veins were dried up, the town had no viability and no economic viability, and people simply picked up and moved away and left the town there. And so you have the remains of those are the fabled western ghost towns. Most of them were old mining towns that had just simply been abandoned when the ore of the veins of precious metal dried up. You got to disabuse yourself though of some of the stuff and the sort of stereotypes, motifs and stuff coming out of Western movies. The early mining settlements were more like industrial operations in towns than they were the sort of Wild West in Dirt Street, and you got the two cowboys with the 6 guns there or whatever. They were more like industrial setups, the mining equipment for extraction and so forth. And they brought in a lot of foreign expertise, a lot of people from South America and from Asia who had a lot of experience with large-scale mining, and that was put to use. It wasn't unusual for a mining town, half or more of the population, to be foreign-born. And, of course, that caused problems because, the immigrants worked for lower wages. They were cheaper labor in general, and American workers felt that they were cost jobs because of this influx of immigrants. And so it actually led to the first piece of immigration restriction legislation that was passed by Congress. In 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. And you want to note that, the Chinese Exclusion Act, 1882, which prohibited further immigration from China to the United States. And it was because of the competition for jobs, not only in mines, in mining areas, but on the railroads as well in the West, that the proponents of the legislation wanted those jobs kept open for native-born Americans. So you had the mining boom that comes in. That was the first wave of settlement. The economic effects were pretty intense. It's going to affect the vast increase in the amount of silver that's available is going to affect the big currency debate that we'll be getting to in later assignments. That was probably the most heated political issue of the late 19th century. and the environmental scars of the mining, and the sort of environmental devastation that was wrought in those areas is in many cases still visible today. And of course, for Native Americans, it was a disaster because, if they were using lands, occupying lands that happened to be nearby where strikes were made, they were simply pushed aside to make room for American settlers and prospectors. So, all right, well, that's clip number 1 for Unit 8 Assignment 7, and that was on the introduction and on the mining frontier.